Hey, aren't you new around here? Yeah, I thought so. Welcome to Athalia, a land of beauty beyond words and wonder aplenty. But now, before you go running off and find yourself surrounded by a group of touchy-feely Kender and a few less gold pieces in your pocket, I have a few tips for you. With all its wonder and glory, Athalia still has its dark corners you gotta look out for. So I think it's best that you brush up on your history, your theology, and your geography before we go too far. Why don't we go take a seat over at the Inn of the Fallen Prophet? I hear they have the best ale in all the discovered lands. Just make sure you got a nice sharp dagger by your side. You never know when a dirty, stinky old goblin's gonna roll in and start some trouble. Alright? I'll meet you over there. This is Argoth. This is the capital continent of Athalia, and this is the capital city of Athalia. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to flip between these three maps. Most of them will be using this map here, though. It's not quite as detailed as the other older map that I have, but it's a lot prettier to look at. The capital, also named Athalia, is home to many races, and is known throughout the kingdom as being tolerant as well as diverse. It's not uncommon to enter any given tavern and find a dwarf, an elf, and an orc carrying on a civilized conversation. But that's not to say that things have always been this way, and it's also not to say that there isn't a need for armed guards here in an open-armed city. Speaking of the guards, the capital city not only employs a strong law enforcement body, but it also is home to the Knights of the Silver Spire. These knights and paladins are the finest trained fighting force this side of Mount Ephesia. They protect the capital and swear an oath to the Lord of Athalia, who at the moment happens to be a 10-foot furbolg and not one you want to take on at an arm wrestling competition. Lord Shirak Thunderstep is a hero like no other. He pushed back the Ashelvan armies, conquered the will of the gods, and did it all with only a handful of friends. His open-door policy, although frowned upon by his close friends, is an effective way to keep the people happy. Let me tell you about a few of his friends. I'm sure you've heard of the old wild wizard Janik Spelldancer. He's the head of the order and the closest advisor to the king. The wacky wizard is rumored to be the founder of wild magic as well. His spells, at least in his younger years, often went awry. Another close friend of his is Calamar Olanre. Calamar Olanre is also a close traveling companion as well as head scout and ranger to the throne. He lives outside amongst the forest and trees. He's accepted here in the capital, but beyond its borders, he's still seen as the gray-skinned elf, or as we refer to him here in Athalia, the Ashelvan elves. Those elves dwell in a hidden and canopied valley somewhere deep in the Ephesian mountain range. They've been quiet since their last defeat, but should never be underestimated. They are strong in the ways of the blades, as well as magic. Not all of them are so bad, though. If memory serves me correctly, a great hero once helped save the planet from their kind, and he himself was a Shelvan. Therein lies the mystery of these lands. Everything hinges upon perspective. But when not everyone shares the same perspective, it can get confusing from time to time. Let's talk a little bit about the immediate surrounding areas. Just north and east of the capital is Mount Talmar. This enormous mountain range stretches as far as the eye can see and is home to the tallest peak on the continent. It's also home to the majority of mountain dwarves. Though they have their own government and laws, they've never contradicted the capitals, and because of that, they've worked side by side for as long as history can remember. One unique feature of Mount Talmar is its crushing waterfalls that form a makeshift moat around the city, but the most outstanding facet is the invention by Gromf Gearguts. He figured out a way to use mithril, the dwarves' finest and rarest metals, to create a series of tubes that allowed the castle to have its own running water. Add in a few gnome engines and bang, you've got yourself heated indoor water. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Far beyond the capital and further north from Mount Talmar is the Elatian Desert. The Elatian Desert is home to several nomad communities. These are the folks around Athalia who can take the heat. In the summer, the Elatian Desert has been known to get to well over 130 degrees. The Elatian Desert stretches for hundreds of miles and is covered with nothing but burning sand with occasional patches of hardpan. The desert is prone to sandstorms that are powerful and can last for hours if not days. Travelers often find themselves lost in many of the sandstorms found here. Found amongst the barren wastes are ancient pyramids. No one knows when they arrived or who built them. One of the only attractions to the Alatian Desert is the city named after it. It is a major trade hub, and a lot of the goods found here, for whatever reason, cannot be found anywhere else on the continent. When the people chose to settle here, they chose wisely. A large mountain range to the west and north of them often blocks the sun that beats down, especially during those summer months. Magically shielded from the desert by Mount Elijah, Shamar is a frozen wasteland. Several barbarian communities live here. The Ice Shard and the Bear Claw are the most commonly known. To the north of the frozen wasteland is an ice-covered mountain that shields Shamar from the North Sea. There is little to no life found here in Shamar. It is harsh, frozen and cold all months of the year. History tells us that Delvenistra and Rillis once took up home here in the icy mountains to the north and set up a camp during the last Ashelvan War. To the northeast of the desert are Port Altos and Port Mortar. These two neighboring port cities have always had a friendly relationship, and several times throughout the year will get together to have festivals, which include competitions. All trade in the north comes through one of these ports. East of the desert and south of the port cities is the plains of Delgorth. These plains are home to the natives, people who have chosen to live outside of society. They are generally friendly and will allow travel through their lands as long as they are not bothered. There is a path that leads south from the plains of Delgorth known as the Tierman's Path. Tierman was a hero to their people who led their people here and set up their communities. South of the plains is a large lake known as Paramir. In the center of the lake is an island known as Scorn. It is said that several ancient dragons live on this island, and it is rarely visited. Continuing east will bring you to the Tanaan Jungle. The Tanaan Jungle is filled with many dangers. It is filled with large lizard-like creatures roaming throughout its hot and humid climate. To the southeast of its end is a volcano, which is very much active at all times. Just south of the Tanaan Jungle, but north of Mount Ephesia, is Ashtaranolith, home to the High Elves. Historically speaking, it's the most ancient city that still stands in all of Athalia. The elves' love of nature can be seen in their architecture. Instead of cutting down trees to build houses, the wizards of Ashtaranolith formed spells to construct homes within the trunks of the trees themselves. Travel within Ashtaranolith is prohibited. It is by invite only that one may travel through the land of the High Elves. Elves that choose to leave Ashtaranolith are considered stray elves and are not welcome back unless by invitation. South of Ashtaranolith is another elven community known as Failwar. Here, many of the stray elves that can't live by the strict rules of Ashtaranolith settle. They are considered more of a wild breed of elf. Mount Ephesia is the largest mountain chain in all of Athalia. It separates the north from Lathmore. Mount Ephesia is home to several Firbolg tribes, as well as the entrance to Shadowvale. To the south of Mount Ephesia is Lathmore. Lathmore is a coastal city of Kender and Halflings. I thought I should elaborate a little bit more on the species of Kender, for those of you who have never heard of them before. Kender are usually slightly smaller than Halfling in stature. They're colorful little folks who can't keep their hands to themselves. It's not really their fault, it's just a trait of their species. If they see something shiny, there's a good chance it's going to become theirs, whether they choose to take it or not. Oftentimes, a Kender will find something in his pocket that belongs to someone else, with no knowledge of how it got there. They're friendly folk, but they should be treated cautiously. Just a little north of Lathmore is a forest made completely of candy. As absurd as it may sound, the candy cane forest was actually implemented by the Wizards of Athalia. They did this because a cave lies within the candy cane forest just at the base of Mount Ephesia that leads to a portal, where one might find himself amongst the gods. Alistair the Crow himself found himself here once. It was rumored that he died here in these caves. A day's journey by boat to the southeast of the mainland is Calith. Calith is the oldest known community in Athalia. Calith is home to some of the richest families in all of Athalia. They make their wealth off the back of the poor and gladiators. Richmond is located 400 miles north of the main continent. It is home to the warlike people. It is home to the Minotaur. These Minotaur are born and bred to be warriors. They are not cursed beings as you may have heard of. The Minotaurs of Richmond are civilized amongst themselves. However, they do not welcome guests with open arms. After the last Great War, trade was opened up between the mainland and Richmond. I could continue with the geography lesson here, however, it could take all day. I could tell you about Karoth, a very large island off of the coast of Lathmore, or I could tell you about Delphonics, the home to the Hill Dwarves, or Deep Murk Swamp, with all its tragedies. However, I think I'm going to shift gears at this point. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the history of Athalia. Little is known for sure about its birth. Each race has its own version of which god was responsible. However, it is general consensus that Erebus, the god of light and good, Sargon, the god of darkness and evil, and quite possibly Calyx, the god of chaos and imbalance, were the first of many gods to arrive. Whether they are responsible for its creation is still unknown. Clerics and historians claim that Erebus was tricked by Sargon to allow Calyx to warp and twist the goodly races into the evil races we know today. The elves became the Ashelvan elves, dwarves became orcs, and so on and so forth. However, that is still yet to be confirmed. Wars divided the elves and sent the Ashelvan elves to the valley known as Shadowvale, a land only accessible by traveling through a week journey at best into the under caverns of Athalia. The years following this led to a separation in the dwarven community living in Mount Ephesia at the time. The clans split, trying to decide whether to fight the invading Ashelvan or to flee. Half the clans settled far north in Mount Talmar, bordering the northern part of the capital, also known as Athalia. The other half founded Delphonics, a home built into the hills of the land surrounding Porthos, a coastal port city. Now I'd like to tell you a little tale about this area. One of the most important events to occur during the first few hundred years was the coming of the Viscontis. They arrived by night in Porthos. No one ever claimed to have seen the ship make port. Their time in Porthos was also short, but seemed to be coming with good tidings. They made a purchase of a piece of land in a cove south of Porthos that was nearly inaccessible but by sea, and due to the large reef formation, even that was only for the finest of captains. After they settled in the cove, a keep of particular architecture was constructed by the hands hired not of Porthos. Where the crews came from was just as much a mystery as their arrival. Some thought, based on the thorny black spires, that it was crafted by an other-planar creature. And to add to the mystery, the structure was completed in less than 6 months. Rumors started to swirl about where the family had come from. The family never used their first names, but did refer to the child as Valus. Several years after their coming, magic was outlawed. A delivery ship bringing goods returned to Porthos one day with only one surviving crew member. He made claims that there was now an elder Visconti living in the keep, and he was practicing some ungodly form of magic in an attempt to help heal his ill and dying grandson. Porthos sent a crew to investigate and never returned to the city. What few know is that the crew discovered that indeed there was magic being practiced. It was a new form brought to Athalia from a place known only as the Dark Lands, called necromancy. It scared those unfamiliar to it and enraged those forced to keep it from use. They attacked the family with no knowledge of what was going on. The Viscontis were destroyed, and only the father was left within an inch of death. He called out to whoever would hear his cries. What heard him was Aristha, a demon of the highest rank. Vengefully, Valus was not given his life back, but rather an eternity of unlife to seek revenge on those who wronged him, and start a new family by spreading his disease. That day is known for being the first day that a vampire set foot on Athalia. The coming of vampire and the summoning of a demon to Athalia began the first age of darkness. A failed wizard named Rillis Knave made a deal with the demon as well. He was given all the knowledge of the demon and crafted a gem that could capture the soul of one who touched it. Rillis called to him all the dark races and any who would side with him. Athalia could sense a war coming, and so did the god Erebus. He too chose several heralds for his cause. One was an elven wizard named Seren, who was given the knowledge to craft a sword to steal the soul of Rillis with a single blow. With the help of a dwarven ranger and a 3/4 elf raised by the Thieves Guild on the streets of Calith, an island that was filled with the rich and who throve off of the backs of slaves and gladiators, Saren built an army to strike back at Rillis. But Calix and his chaotic ways planted the seed of jealousy in the heart of the leader of Karath, the known capital at the time. The seed spread and grew, and King Bellet Redwood sent out his Knights of the Silver Spire to defeat Rillis. Karath was overrun in less than 3 days, and the king was found hanging in his library. The battles had been costly, though, and Rillis had to evacuate Karath and leave it to his minions. Saren and his 2 companions pursued the wizard and caught him somewhere in the cavernous region of Mount Ephesia. Little is known of the battle, but it is said that the elf landed the strike that captured Rillis within the sword. Saren returned to Ashtar Nalith with little memory of the events, only that he no longer had possession of the sword, the soul gem, or the whereabouts of his 2 friends. Rillis was never heard from again in Saren's lifetime. Saren was negotiating a trade deal with the new capital, located several days north of the ruins of Karath, now a place few dared to enter, a place filled with stories of ungodly creatures, when tragedy struck him and the 7 apprentices accompanying him. An Shelvan assassin named Jalandriel Acladius single-handedly intercepted him on his return and slaughtered the group, but not before Saren cursed the assassin. Jalandriel, one of the most known names in all Athalian history, was a mystery to most, a legend to some, and nothing more than a tall tale to others. If you saw his face, you were most likely dead within the next breath. His life, and beyond, was an anomaly, even to the gods. Raised in Shadowvale and trained by Khazak, another Shelvan assassin, Jalandriel broke out of the Dark Realm when he was relatively young. He remained in contact with Khazak, but mostly as a contract contact and nothing more. Strangely, and much unlike most of his kin, Jalandriel still held true to his lost elven heritage. This, and his ties to his family, he always considered his biggest weakness. It wasn't until he nearly lost everything that he finally found his true calling. The gods are cruel. Jalandriel discovered this firsthand when he met Valis Vesconchi on the road home from a midsummer visit to Ashtar Nalith, a place no elf would allow in a Shelvan to travel. The man claiming to be a historian tricked the assassin into taking a job for him and paying him an enormous amount of money in gems. The wine they shared before parting was ancient, and even Jalandriel, who had been trained to detect lies, poison, and most certainly a hint of blood, never saw the trap that eventually made him, for a time, like Valis. Jalandriel returned to Shadowvale, fearing Valis had tried to kill him, and believed his family was next. They'd never been held in high regard in the Vale, and quite often had been a thorn in the side of the hierarchical power struggle. He'd been right, partially. The only possible survivor was his sister Delvanistra, whose body was not found amongst the dead. Jalandriel did find the assassin hiding invisibly in his home's extensive library and gave chase, but failed to locate the killer and was eventually blamed for the death of his family. Attempting to discover more of his family's killer, Jalandriel ended up in strange company in an even stranger land. The Shelvan elf helped rescue a gnome named Kerplunk Tinkerlot and escaped a battle with a rock dragon named Neville by falling through a portal to Centerspoke, a city at the center of the universe. There, they hired a tout, or a tour guide, named Hamlin, a half-pig man, to get them back to Athalia. The adventure ended up killing Kerplunk, a death Jalandriel held himself responsible for, and made Jalandriel a new enemy, a tiefling named Frix, whose skills with the blade were nearly as good as Jal's. A final encounter aboard the Githyanki astral ship led Jalandriel back to Athalia. He was weak and run out of his poison that Valis had left him to sustain his life. Near death, Jalandriel found himself outside of Porthos. The skies had suddenly become clouded, and he would soon discover would remain that way for some time. Unconscious, he was found by Rook Cameron, a Minotaur warrior, and Dirk Greenleaf, a halfling rogue, and he was snuck into the city. He was rejected at first by one of the companion's friends, Naana Silverleaf, a stray elf that had left Ashtar Nalith 20 years earlier, but accepted by several others, including Tyrion Stonegrim, proprietor of the Salty Dog Inn and Tavern. Garion Greymark, also a close friend of the companions, was resistant at first, but agreed to help this Shelvan elf. Jalandriel believed he had been healed, and he had every intention of using his friend's kindness to his advantage until his feelings towards Naana evolved. Sadly, he soon discovered that it was Saren who had raised and trained the orphan elves, Cordis, her brother, and herself. He believed she would never accept him. The four traveled to the Visconti keep along the road. Jalandril finally accepted that he was now a vampire. When he found Valis after being separated from his friends, he discovered that it was not Valis who'd killed his parents, but another vampire Valis had created first, named Corpus Dayspring. He also discovered that Valis had no choice but to turn him after he discovered Jalandril was part of a prophecy known as the Morning Star Prophecy. Jalandril parted ways, fearing for the safety of Nyana. She eventually pursued him and was captured by Arkan Darkrage, a half-dragon with a hate for Jalandril as well. The groups all converged on Calith, and a battle took place atop a waterfall in the middle of the jungle of Tanaan. Here Jalandril caught up with Corpus and discovered, by a sword through the back, that Delbanistra, his own sister, had been part of his family's death. At one point, Valis arrived to save Jalandril, who now believed Nyana had died in the fight. They retreated to safety. Rook, Dirk, and Garion eventually caught up with Valis and Jalandril. A near-death experience caused Dirk to become the Hand of Araphis. He'd returned with the god's strongest blessing. Valis helped Dirk and Garion return to Athalia to prepare the king for the war with the Ashelvan kingdom. He discovered the clouded skies had a magical origin to allow not only the dark living Ashelvan elf to rise against Athalia, but also an army of undead raised to fight alongside the Ashelvan elves. He then left Jalandril and Rook to find Nyana on Calith. Nyana, unbeknownst to them, had been kidnapped by a three-quarter elf hired by Cordis to bring her safely back to Ashtaranalith. This elf eventually saw what was going on and aided Nyana to get back to Athalia. When Jalandril learned more of the prophecy, he knew he needed to return to Athalia before he could find Nyana. All the friends converged on the battlefield only to discover that Valis had been behind the war the whole time, and that he'd killed Corpus. While Rook, Dirk, and Garion battled Arkan with his dragon Leviath, Jalandril knew what he had to do. He called upon the power of the sun and rid the skies of the clouds. Valis was destroyed, or he believed to have been, and Jalandril was gone. The elf that had helped Nyana in the end fell to a poison arrow, but his body was never recovered. Jalandril and his friends' history did not end there, but history does not always have a happy ending, and some stories are better left on a good note. There is a period of growth in Athalia where war is over and the goodly races are settling into the lands that will eventually define their history. The Ashelvan elves return to Shadowvale to recuperate after their defeat. 400 years later, Janek's spelldancer accidentally discovers chaos magic, a form of magic that often creates interesting side effects, and leaves school to study it. At the same time, another student seeks out a master capable of advancing his talents. This other mage was known as Alistair, or the Crow. His talents and ability to learn exceeded all his fellow classmates, and he left school as well. The two young wizards found each other and began learning from each other. It wasn't long before rumors of war started up again. The Ashelvan elves, seeking revenge and a place among the surface dwellers, began recruiting elves, dwarfs, and any others who would do their bidding on the surface world. At this time, Calamor Alanre, an Ashelvan elf who did not agree with his people, fled Shadowvale and was injured in an attack as he had tried to escape. He miraculously made it out of the Vale and was found by a tribe of Firbolg giants. They were fearful of Ashelvan elves, but one warrior, a young man named Shrak Thunderstep, agreed to watch over the elf while he healed. The two quickly became friends and left the tribe to seek others who would listen and aid in the cause of stopping the war. Eventually their travels led them to a town south of the capital where they met and joined Janix and Alistair. Their investigation led them to an island named Rahuna, where they found a rogue wizards guild working with the Ashelvan elves. They had created a spell that enchanted any item of their choosing to control the weather. The skies over the island were already covered, and the plan to spread the items over Athalia had begun. An even darker plan was in the works, they discovered. A new race of half-demons were being created, named the Kamut, and were being raised to fight alongside the Ashelvan elves. The Kamut were unintelligent beings, but were savage and cunning warriors, with a secret and bizarre ability to merge their body mass together when needed. Their blood was acid, and made them hard to kill, and even more dangerous when you were successful. Janix and the others failed to stop the wizards, but managed to escape the island with the help of a young blue dragon named Cold Knight and his elven friend Glasgow. Upon their return, they were met with disbelief and doubt. Enraged that neither the capital nor the conclave of wizards would do anything, Alistair gave in to his dark obsessions and dominated Glasgow and Cold Knight, forcing the two of them to attack nearby villages and spread rumors of war. Janix tried to talk the opposing wizard out of his plan, but failed, and Alistair fled to the southlands of Lathmore to discover the truth behind the rumor that there is an item that would allow him to take the place of the god of darkness, Sargon. Janix and the others left the capital just before the war broke out in hopes of stopping Alistair. Along the way, they met a halfling with the knowledge of the items needed to succeed. Twig Whispernot told them that there was a cave near the south coast just north of Lathmore where someone who possesses the 7 rings of the races can go and challenge the gods. Both of the parties were successful in acquiring several rings, and the only one that remained was the ring of the halfling. During a ship ride aboard Captain Ragg's ship, a pirate whose reputation preceded him, it was discovered that Twig was in possession of the ring. Alistair, still dominating Cold Night, attacked the ship. With little to no decision to make, Janix gave Alistair the ring. To their surprise, Alistair then towed their boat to safety and left to claim the right to face Sargon. Janix accepted this fate, and he and the others returned to Athalia to aid where they could. It is unknown what happened to Alistair during those trials, but it is believed he was defeated by whatever forces opposed him on his quest to godhood. The wizards of Rahuna had been moving their devices in the Kamut into position, ready to head up the first strike. They were extremely effective and left a lake of acid where once stood the wizard's spire just south of Athalia. Janix, Shirak, Calamar, and the newly freed Cold Night in Glasgow started making pinpoint strikes against the camps where the weather-controlling devices were. They quickly grabbed the attention of the Ashelvan elves and were forced south towards Lathmore. Mysteriously, they regained possession of the 7 rings, and Twig successfully took the place of the vacated god of Chaos's seat. Calyx, now mortal, soon realized what had happened and seeks out Twig and his friends. He is defeated, but not before he passes on his seat of immortality to his unknowing son, Caelin. The party, doing whatever they can to aid Athalia, met up with a gladiator named Gorth, who had escaped Calith, and claims that it is freed. The gladiators and many of the slaves would join the armies of Athalia and help push the Ashelvans back into their hole. They agree to travel to Calith. It's here that Calamar gains possession of the sentient sword possessed by Rillis Knave. Once again, the companions relied on Captain Ragus to get them to Calith. After hearing their story, he rallied several other pirate captains and smugglers and waited for the signal to load the coming passengers. During this time, Janix discovers the art of chronomancy, but also learns it cannot be used to change events, but rather create alternate realities. With the aid of the gladiators and the slaves of Calith, they were able to defeat the armies of the Ashelvan elves and push them back into their holes, once and for all. Many of years have passed since that day, and new heroes have risen to take up the call of the old heroes. Will they be successful in their quest? That is still unknown.